All right, so a couple of days ago, we had the official kickoff for the start of the 2022 World Cup that is being held in Qatar. And so far, it has just been an absolute shit show for so many different reasons. And there's been a lot of different scandals that have been surrounding this, from, the initial approval process of the World Cup being centered in Qatar in the first place, lots of corruption and bribery surrounding that, and all the way to, the actual construction of the infrastructure that they set up to be able to host the World Cup, and the outgrowth or the aftermath of a lot of the experiences that people are having now that it is finally going on. So we're going to get into a lot of the background and details of all of these different various controversies, but here I just want to start off with one of the most insane clips that I've seen in a long time. This is from the FIFA president, and keep in mind that FIFA is essentially like a mafia organization. They are one of the most corrupt organizations in the entire world, and this is the president of FIFA, who is basically going to try to whitewash all of the human rights abuses, the anti-gay policies within Qatar, the mistreatment of migrant workers who they essentially have used as slaves, not just to build the World Cup infrastructure, but also just to build the rest of their infrastructure within this very wealthy country that has gotten obscenely rich off of fossil fuel money. And so he is going to give this absolutely bizarre take on how he thinks that it's actually all going really well, and how, Qatar is actually this really welcoming place to all of these different groups of people. So let's just go ahead and watch this clip here.
Because I know what it means to be discriminated, to be bullied as a foreigner in a foreign country, as a child at school. I was bullied because I had red hair, and I had these red, how do you call them?
Freckles.
Sorry?
Freckles.
Freckles. Yes, I don't even know the term. Today I feel Qatari. Today I feel Arab. Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker.
Okay, so what the fuck was that, man? I mean, again, one of the most wildest clips that I've seen in a long time. I mean, he's literally doing this explicitly. I mean, this is why he named those specific groups of people. I feel gay, which is a very weird way to go about, pushing this type of a narrative. If you want to defend against these human rights abuses, the, homophobic laws that are in place, or the treatment of migrant workers, there's a different way you could probably go about it than doing it in this way. But he says, I feel gay, I feel African, I feel like a migrant worker, I feel disabled. I mean, he is explicitly reaching out and talking about all of these different groups of people who have faced incredible brutality from the government of Qatar. Okay, and he's just coming out and just brazenly trying to gloss over all of that and pretending as if this is some sort of a welcoming environment for all of those different groups of people. And you're going to see how wild this is when we get into a little bit more details in terms of, FIFA's corruption, and, details in terms of the mistreatment of migrant workers and all of these other controversies. But, I mean, just as he pointed out here, Timothy Burke down here, I mean, coming out and saying, like, I got you, I feel gay, right? I mean, this is a guy who just a couple years ago was, watching some of these FIFA World Cup matches, sitting in between Mohammed bin Salman, the brutal dictator of Saudi Arabia, and Vladimir Putin. Okay, so I mean, we know exactly who you are. We know what FIFA is. So let's just not pretend as if this is some sort of a welcoming and a good environment for all of those different groups of people you were just talking about. I mean, completely ridiculous that he would even come out and say that, and honestly, unnecessary. I mean, you could have just said nothing at all. You could have tried to frame it in a different way, but he chose to say what he wanted to say. So now let's just go ahead and get into some of these controversies. So Vox did a great breakdown on some of the main ones that we were talking about. So they say the many controversies surrounding the 2022 World Cup explained. So what are they talking about here? They say the 2022 World Cup is set to kick off in Qatar on November 20th, just yesterday, stirring excitement and anticipation in soccer fans around the world. But even if you're not a diehard soccer fan, you probably heard something about the many controversies swirling around this year's edition of the most famous sporting event in the world. It's something crazy like 3.5 billion people are estimated to watch this sporting event. So it's a pretty big deal, right? We're not just talking about like some one-off soccer event that's being held here. It's a big deal, the sporting event in and of itself, and it's also a big deal which country it is located in, right? So they continue saying, since FIFA, the governing body for international soccer, awarded the 2022 World Cup to Qatar in 2010, the tournament has been ensnared in a tangled web of scandals. That web includes everything from allegations of corruption and bribery, and you're going to see as we get more details into the corruption and bribery side of this. I mean, it's like they didn't even try to cover it up or do it in secret or behind closed doors. Like, these people were pretty much just like, hey, you deposit $1 million in my bank account and you'll get my vote for supporting Qatar to host the World Cup. I mean, straight up like that level of corruption, right? They say corruption and bribery during the bidding process to host the tournament, and all the way to accusations that Qatar is using the event to sports wash its record of human rights abuses, which it 100% is. Could not be more obvious. I mean, this is the same shit that we saw from Saudi Arabia, trying to do things like hosting the Live Golf tournament and signing all of these like American golf players and all of that shit. I mean, this is what they do, right? You're trying to normalize yourself within the international community, within the minds of people that, look, we are this developed society. We, are progressive in the modern world and, don't believe all of these other allegations against us. We're here just participating in this just like everybody else. Now, I want to say this before we get into more of these details as well, because the Qatari government in some ways has just been ignoring a lot of these scandals. They've in some ways been lying about a lot of these scandals and trying to cover them up. But another angle that they've gone at in terms of like defending themselves has basically been pointing out like hypocrisies coming from a lot of other governments like the United States and Western European nations who are calling out their human rights abuses and basically just saying, look, you guys did the same shit. I mean, whether you want to talk about, the invasion of Iraq, which led to potentially over 1 million deaths of innocent men, women, and children, right? Whether you want to talk about, our history in Latin America during the Cold War, whether you want to talk about our support for the ongoing war in Yemen. I mean, so many different things that you could fairly point out in terms of egregious human rights abuses, war crimes, etc., coming from a lot of these Western European countries and the United States. That's fair to point out that there's a level of hypocrisy there, but also that doesn't excuse some of the more egregious things that Qatar is doing right now, like literally as we speak right now. And it also doesn't excuse just the brazen corruption that went in to this bidding process. But they continue here saying, according to an analysis by The Guardian, at least 6,500 migrant laborers have died in Qatar since the tournament was awarded to the country in 2010. And they say at least for a reason here, because it is damn near impossible to get accurate numbers out of the Qatari government in terms of how many of these migrant workers have actually died. So I genuinely would not be surprised if this number is like double or triple or even more than the 6,500 citation that they give here. But even that, 6,500 migrant laborers have died under incredibly suspicious circumstances because, I mean, keep in mind, not only are they living in horrific conditions, and I recommend you go watch, there was a recent Johnny Harris video where he broke down some of the background on this, and the conditions that these people are living in is just absolutely atrocious. I mean, you're talking about, 8 to 10 guys packed into the same room. They're all sharing one bathroom between like over 100 of them. No showers, no cleanliness to it whatsoever. They're basically forced into like slave-like conditions in terms of their labor contracts with some of the companies that they are forced to work with, and in some cases they confiscate their passports, and basically they're tasked with the responsibility of building up all of this infrastructure, while the Qatari government gets obscenely wealthy, not just off of their essentially slave-like labor, but also, I mean, the Qatari government has a huge social safety net for their own population. They just don't, extend that to these migrant workers who are actually doing all of the grunt work and the service work that builds up their economy, right? So, I mean, it's just essentially a slave, situation going on in this country. And, again, 6,500 migrant workers, you compare that to other World Cup events where they have had to build some of this infrastructure and stuff. This is like 100 times more than any other country has ever had die in the process of building their World Cup infrastructure. So it's absolutely insane. They continue saying global tensions around the competition have been further inflamed by FIFA's controversial decision to move it to the Northern Hemisphere's winter to avoid Qatar's infernal summer heat, a move that critics have seized on as proof that FIFA is bending over backward to accommodate the already troublesome host. So, I mean, yeah, that's a small part of this, but it's also just adding again to that aspect of, corruption here, because, Qatar, not only because of their human rights abuses and all of that shit, didn't really deserve to get this nomination, but on top of that, they had like none of the infrastructure set up to actually host the World Cup. They had to do all of it within the last 10 to 12 years. And on top of that, it's just not really a place that makes a lot of sense to host the World Cup, which again, they moved it to the winter specifically so that Qatar could host this event. Because if you were to try to hold this at a normal time in the summer, it would just be straight up way too hot for anybody to go and attend the event or to play soccer, right? So, I mean, they obviously are just bending over backwards for this brutal authoritarian country, but they continue. Okay, so here's controversy one. This is surrounding the FIFA corruption that went into the bidding process. So they say FIFA's decision in December of 2010 to award the 2022 tournament to Qatar caught the world off guard, with many fans expressing surprise and more than a little doubt that a desert monarchy whose soccer team had never qualified for a World Cup had legitimately beat out global sporting powerhouses that made bids to host the tournament, like the United States, Japan, and Australia. They say these preliminary corruption allegations turned out to be only the tip of the trash heap for FIFA. In 2014, the UK-based Sunday Times reported on a trove of leaked emails and other documents suggesting that prominent Qatari soccer officials and former FIFA executive committee member Mohammed bin Hammam had allegedly paid millions of dollars worth of bribes to FIFA officials. They say bin Hammam had already received a lifetime ban from FIFA in 2011 for other corruption charges. They say a subsequent investigation into corruption allegations conducted by FIFA's chief ethics investigator. That is hilarious that they have a chief ethics investigator while, again, this is one of the most corrupt organizations in the entire world. And former United States Attorney Michael J. Garcia found evidence of serious irregularities in the bidding process, but offered no conclusive proof that Qatari officials had used bribes to influence the outcome of the vote. Okay, so they say no conclusive proof, but let's be real. Okay, we understand the levels of corruption that are at play here, right? They continue saying, yet FIFA's troubles only deepened from there. In May of 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed indictments against 9 FIFA officials, accusing the officials of racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering in connection with a far-reaching scheme to sell broadcasting rights for the tournament. Soon after, authorities in Switzerland announced a parallel investigation into allegations of corruption in the bidding process for the 2018 World Cup in Russia and the 2022 tournament in Qatar. So again, this isn't the first time that they've done this. FIFA has always been this type of a corrupt, money-seeking, power-centered organization. Okay, it's always been like this. This is just the more recent and honestly more like brazen and open example of that. Okay, so that was just controversy one. Now we're going to get to the treatment of the migrant workers, right? I mean, this guy coming out saying, I feel like a migrant worker, right? As if he's trying to show some solidarity with these people who have been brutalized by this government in Qatar. So they say the tournament's infrastructure has been built on the backs of low-paid migrant workers. I would really more accurately define them as essentially slaves because of the traps that Qatar has set for them. But they say, even for resource-wealthy nations like Qatar, hosting the World Cup is an arduous logistical undertaking, requiring billions of dollars of investments in new stadiums, transportation infrastructure, and accommodations to serve the hundreds of thousands of fans who attend the tournament. But Qatar, which has spent nearly $220 billion on new infrastructure ahead of the tournament, $220 billion, they've kept labor costs down by relying on an extensive and deeply exploitative network of low-wage migrant labor to prepare for the tournament. So they say the horrors of Qatar's migrant worker system are no secret, and the dangerous conditions created by that system are not unique to the preparations for the World Cup. Until the late 2010s, the vast majority of Qatar's roughly 2 million migrant laborers, who compose about 94% of the country's total labor force. So again, I mean, think about this. This would be as if, the United States was bringing in, for 94%, almost the entirety of our workers who do things like working in the service sector, doing all of our construction. Imagine if the United States labor force was 94% comprised of like Mexican immigrants who we were bringing over and then trapping in this complex web in order to make sure that they have no choice but to continue working. Oftentimes you're not paying them. Oftentimes, you're threatening them with jail time or deportation. I mean, we kind of do that to a smaller degree. Obviously, we do have many migrant workers who come into the United States, but 94% of the country's total labor force, that is fucking insane. And they say these workers were employed through a notoriously coercive labor system known as the kafala, or sponsorship system, which tethered workers to a sponsor, that basically their employer, through a series of legally binding contracts. Although Qatar has made some major reforms to the kafala system, which are really just, hollow virtue signaling types of deals there in recent years, such as ending the requirement that workers receive their sponsors' approval before leaving the country or changing jobs, the remnants of that system still give employers an inordinate amount of power over the workers' lives. So I mean, again, you're taking all of these workers who comprise basically the entirety of your whole labor force, and you're basically setting up a system where their employers, these corporations, get complete control over their lives. And again, in some cases, they'll straight up take their passports, right? They'll take their documents, so that if they ever wanted to leave or go back home or switch to a different job, they would need to get approval from their employer, who's probably going to shoot it down. And again, I mean, if your employer is controlling not only the types of work that you're doing and the conditions that you're living in, but also controls your freedom of movement, then you are basically a slave. I mean, there's no other real accurate way to put it. And there's so many other details that go into this that are just incredibly nefarious, and how these employers are not just exploiting their labor inherently just by the value of them, the value of the labor they are producing versus what they are being paid, but also just, again, not paying them, withholding their pay, refusing to, give them any semblance of adequate living conditions and all of that. I mean, it's an incredibly brutal system that we're talking about here. They continue saying, as Qatar has ramped up its preparations for the World Cup, the consequences of this system have been increasingly deadly. In 2021, again, The Guardian reported that more than 6,500 workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka had died in Qatar since 2010, and a spokesperson for the tournament organizers said there have only been 3 work-related fatalities and 37 non-work-related deaths. Okay, really? 37 non-work-related deaths and 3 work-related deaths? I mean, this is how, egregious their lies are. They say, meanwhile, workers interviewed by nonprofit groups like Amnesty International have reported enduring an array of abuses, including wage theft, excessive working hours, dangerous working and living conditions, and physical and sexual abuse. So again, this is what we're talking about. When we're talking about controversies, it's not mild shit. This is widespread. It is systemic. It has been going on for years. They've known about it for years. Essentially, nothing has been done to actually fundamentally change this system that they have put in place. And this is who FIFA decided to give the World Cup to. Now, again, you could point to other countries and argue that they are also, similarly, maybe to a lesser degree, brutal on the global stage with the exploitation of workers. I mean, how many U.S. corporations rely on basically slave labor in other foreign countries? We just had that Supreme Court case a couple of years ago where it was basically Nestle, and the Supreme Court said that, yeah, it's okay for you to use basically child slave labor over in Africa in order to extract some of your cocoa resources, right? This is the type of shit that we do here in the United States as well. But I mean, still, you're talking about sort of a slightly more distant type of a situation that's going on here, and you're talking about slightly different degrees of what's going on here. So I mean, again, it's not just that Qatar was awarded this World Cup because of all their human rights abuses. I think that is bad in and of itself, but on top of that, the whole corruption and bribery that went into them getting this awarded to them in the first place, that was egregious in and of itself. And all of this is just stacking up on top of each other. And on top of that, since the event has actually started, we've had so many different controversies that have actually happened in real time as we're watching this shit show unfold. So just one example here, we had this wild clip of a viral video, as they point out here, of Qatari officials basically going up to this journalist who was just trying to film in a public place and just give a general sense of the vibe of what was going on at the start of the World Cup, and they basically just went up to him and threatened him and tried to apparently break his camera while he was live on TV trying to report on this. And I think he was actually at the time specifically reporting on how journalism was being conducted in Qatar, and this is what they decided to do. Okay, so we had that happened. We also had this bizarre situation with alcohol sales, because again, this is a theocratic monarchy that we're talking about here, and you're, I guess, technically not supposed to be drinking alcohol, right? So this was part of their contract with FIFA and with these other organizations or corporations that were trying to get in on the World Cup to sell alcohol, and they basically said, yeah, we'll have alcohol available and all of that, and then they just did a complete bait and switch and banned beer at the World Cup stadiums. Now, keep in mind that you could still go and get alcohol. It was just this completely completely ridiculous series of events that they set up in place for fans to have to go and get it. Like, you would have to take a bus, it's 30 minutes away, you got to go all the way over here to just get a simple drink, right, and then go all the way back to the stadium. Stupid, absurd process here. But on top of that, they were also just being complete hypocrites, because they banned it for the general public, for the, you know, average people who were traveling there to go watch these games. You couldn't easily buy a beer, but the motherfuckers who are sitting in these, you know, elite higher up places in the stands, right, all of these government officials and diplomats and representatives and rich people, they got to go and stay in these suites where they got as much alcohol as they wanted, right? So it wasn't even a universal ban or something that was actually centered around principle, right? No explanation really for why they would even do this in the first place. If you knew you were going to host the World Cup, you're going to have to sell alcohol. Believe it or not, you have people coming from all around the world, from all different faiths and religions and backgrounds and countries of origin. People want to drink. It's a sporting event, right? I mean, you would think that that was something they would understand from the beginning, but then they just do some bizarre shit like this. We also have, you know, again on their the homophobic side of this entire phenomenon. Here is posted up by Grant Wall. He says, just now, security guard refusing to let me into the stadium for the USA-Wales game, which is actually happening right now. He said, you have to change your shirt. It's not allowed. And of course, literally all he has on is just a soccer ball with a rainbow outline around it. Okay, this is not allowed. It's banned. And on top of that, you also had a situation where some of these different teams were going to or planning to wear these rainbow armbands as a show of solidarity with the gay community around the world, and they scrapped that as well. 7 teams or so decided not to do that because essentially FIFA came out and said that they would have automatically imposed penalties. They would have like automatic yellow cards at the beginning of the game, so it just completely prevented them from doing that. Can't even wear a t-shirt that has a rainbow on it apparently in the stadium. You also just have bizarre shit like this with the quality of everything there. I mean, just shoddy stuff. I mean, this literally reminds me of the Fire Festival, if you guys remember how that just completely imploded on itself. I mean, this is like apparently a Greek salad, looks like absolute dog shit. And then, you know, this is another view of some of the places where I guess people were staying. Just basically like tents where you have a rough outline of a mattress here, and then like I guess on the other side of that there's like a desk and another bed, and this is just like, I mean, it's just completely pathetic. The, you know, quality standards of how this has been unfolding for average people who are trying to get there, the bait and switch with the beer, that was bizarre. The interactions with the journalists there as they're trying to continue to hide the view of some of the conditions that some of these migrant workers are living in within Qatar as well. And then on top of that, you have the FIFA bribery, the corruption that went into them even getting this bid in the first place. And then on top of that, obviously, you have the completely egregious human rights abuses. So, I mean, this World Cup has been, you know, a good example of how corrupt a lot of these international organizations can be, how, corrupt our international global political system can be as well, because it wasn't just about some individual members of FIFA being corrupt. You also had other governments from around the world who, would bring on some of their FIFA representatives to go help them and assist in like oil deals and natural gas deals, which is something that Qatar specializes in. I mean, just rampant corruption on the global stage that has been perfectly exemplified in this absolute shit show of a World Cup currently being held in Qatar.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying